detour of audio. So good to see you. So, Bonnie, first of all, as I just said, you are the host of two powerful podcasts. One, Queer Chaplain, and Splintered Grace, which is the podcast you have with your aunt, who's a conservative Christian. So you have a lot of, I like to call that gray in your life, because I think that for a long time lived my life in black and white, and then, the gray is, I think, where spirituality is found. But so my first question for you is, tell us a little bit about your journey. So how did you get to be a queer chaplain?
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, I really thanks for having me on the show for one, but I think it was really great the way you kind of talked about there being maybe some gray in my life or ambiguity, because I don't think it started out that way for me. I grew up in a small town in Idaho, and I was a poor kid. I ran off to church because that was a safe place and a fun place. It was a place that I was cool, and that was a place where I got to know, I guess, Jesus, and I was a big evangelist. I wanted to save people for Jesus, and I thought there was only one way to be spiritual and only one place we all were trying to get, which was heaven. And so, but even early on, I started having questions because my parents weren't church-going folk, so they were going to hell from what I was taught, but that didn't quite line up for me. And so I think that was the start of my journey to kind of start to question maybe there is more than just one way. I mean, I was always a little queer. My parents weren't church-going folks. I went to church. I left a small town. No, very few people left from my family from that small town. So that's kind of how it started, I guess, for me.
Wow. But I thought there was only one way to spirituality. You're telling me there's not? What?
I mean, there really is only one way, but
I'm just kidding you. I'm totally kidding you. So I think that
right.
I think many of us think that way, and I think it's hard to hold competing ideas in our head or to challenge those thoughts, especially around spirituality. I think that at least for me, there's a sense of I don't really know for sure the answers, and there's a lot of danger and fear in that, I think. So holding the possibility of what I think is and the possibility of what could be, I think it's powerful.
And I think a lot of folks are kind of waiting for permission to do or hear things differently. I think for me, I didn't know I could change a word here or there so that it kind of made more sense for me, or those sorts of things. I thought it just had to be the way that it was. And that language couldn't mean something different, and interpretation couldn't be something different.
And are you speaking about scripture, or what are you speaking to?
I think just with everything, to be honest with you. I mean, I think I didn't become this fabulous, person. I wasn't, I did not look like this in that little trailer house back home. If I did, I would have got hurt pretty bad, I think. My dad did a pretty good job of keeping the femininity out of me for as long as he could. And the world did that as well for a while. And I think given the environments that I was in and the places I went or didn't get to go, I lacked the imagination for who I could become, because I couldn't see that I could be something different because I just had never been exposed to it before.
Okay, exposed to it. So tell us a little bit about how you discovered the possibility of who Bonnie could be and this journey to living, I'll say, more authentically. So,
yeah, well, it's been a long journey. As I said, I was a big Jesus freak, loved Jesus. I actually went to go be a youth pastor. I wanted to work with young people. I'd got the calling to be a pastor. And then I realized that I was, at that time, identified as a gay man, and that wasn't quite lining up with what I was taught. And then I was diagnosed with HIV. I was infected when I was 19. And that caused me to, I found out when I turned 20, and that caused me to kind of have to come out and talk about my sexuality and then my HIV status. And I didn't feel like I could share that at church. And church was that was the place I could always go to find safety. And I wasn't able to do it at that point.
Yeah, that's interesting, the idea of safety and spirituality. And I think that there's been many times when I've thought about, I'll say spirit, but God, or whatever label you want to put on there, as for a long time, that spirit was against me, or God was against me actually, and that it was unsafe to be my authentic self, and that there was something wrong with who I was. And then that journey to actually then living in that safe space of spirituality, that's a huge thing. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
mhm.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, I don't think I really knew, like, I didn't feel like God was done with me, or like my spirituality was done with me, but I didn't feel compatible with people in church anymore. And that really, again, caused me to find different ways of being in the world. Rather than seeking refuge in church, I actually sought refuge in drugs and alcohol. And I feel like that was a detour that actually, the first was leaving the church. And then I think finding drugs and alcohol, not that I want to like endorse it and say, hey, go do it. But I think it was a blessing for me. It allowed me it gave me life when nothing else could. And it gave me a way of living that I couldn't have handled on my own, because being diagnosed with HIV, being seen now as like a queer person, that I just didn't feel like I had much going for me.
Right.
And so it kind of allowed me to kind of escape a little bit and, I don't know, just enjoy life.
I think it's a common theme with people who are spiritual leaders, actually, that at least, let me rephrase it. The spiritual leaders I connect with are the ones that have gone into the desert, the ones that have kind of gone, away from the light. And there's a great saying about, let me find it. I just wrote it down somewhere. I hit my notes, that supposedly Ernest Hemingway said, and then I was reading that actually he didn't say this. It doesn't matter. I don't know who said it.
Right.
If anyone out there listening knows who said it, I would love to know. But we're all broken. That's how the light gets in. About the idea of the Chinese vase that breaks. Then someone said, well, it's not valuable anymore. And the owner's like, are you kidding me? The broken vase is the most valuable. And I think that only by breaking can spirit get in. At least in my life, that was the case. So,
well, and that's a lot of the idea with communion. The breaking of the bread is that you break so that you can share, so that you can, so that everyone can be fed, so that everyone can, be nourished. So I think that's another powerful thing about breaking as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so tell me a little bit about, so you've gone through this incredible journey, and then that breaking, and you said sharing. So your life now is about sharing your journey, the process of your breaking, and then also the process of your coming together, I guess. So tell us a little bit about your journey now, and kind of how your work reflects that.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of at a full circle in my life. When I was young, something was put in me that I felt that God had created me to be a godly person and to save people. And I felt like that was for Jesus, and then when I didn't have Jesus, then I had HIV. And so then I started becoming these AIDS activist and HIV activist and queer activist. And that's how I was saving the world. And I didn't really see that as a spiritual experience. But once I got sober, I got to see that there were queer people more like myself, and even maybe more worse than me, if you will, from that point of view, who had spiritual lives and talked about God. And it was the first time that I saw that those things too could exist. And so then I was able to look back and see that actually my AIDS meant the work that I did as an AIDS activist, the work that I did with young people was actually what was initially, I guess, thought to be my goal to begin with. It just wasn't for Jesus. It was for HIV prevention. And then getting sober opened up this idea of spirituality and God again, which was not the same God I went to church with, and it wasn't Jesus. But it just opened up this idea of relying on something other than myself to I guess, to live life, and to also, again, like, to realize, I don't know why. Like, I never would have said that the world was out to get me or that God was out to get me, but I definitely lived my life as if the world was out to get me. And once I started to kind of think of the idea of, could there be a power that's bigger than me? I hope there is. And is it helpful? Sometimes I feel like it's just helpful, whether it's true or not. It's helpful for me to believe and think that maybe it wants for me what I want for me. And initially I just brought God into my life to increase my capacity for success. Like, I felt like, oh, if I have God in my life, because I was totally not, I was succeeding in a lot of ways, but I was like failing in a lot of ways. And I felt like,
and what do you mean what do you by succeeding? Because I think so many people have different definitions.
Yeah. So, well, I was the executive director and a founder of an HIV/AIDS organization. I was like the top gay and in like the state of Idaho, and I was traveling
top
the country.
Gay. I want that. I want to be a top gay.
I know I wasn't a top, but I was gay either way. But and you know that really wasn't, but that's just the way that it felt. And I was traveling all over the country, and I was in magazines and on TV and all these sorts again. And again, in some ways, these were things that I probably never would have had access to or experienced if I didn't get HIV to begin with. Which is kind of an interesting thing, again, to be grateful for. You know, there are a lot of like tragic things that have happened in my life that I've now been so grateful because it's given me the opportunity to exist in a way that I don't think I could have before without those sort of experiences.
Right. Me too. And it's so funny because we definitely share recovery together. That's kind of where we met. So I look at my time in active addiction as the avoidance of spirit on steroids, like the kind of just cutting that, you know, that connection, and that living without that connection was so painful. You know, sometimes you don't know what you have until you lose it. And I think for my own journey, I've looked for God my entire life. Like, I read Conversations with God. I was, you know, Marianne Williamson. I was doing all of that stuff, trying to be perfect Bobby. Like, the only way to get to God was to be perfect. And that I had to try a little harder or whatever. And then what I loved about, you know, talking with you this week and just in our talks in general is that it's in my quote unquote flaws and those times that actually I feel like that's when God said to me, oh, guess what? Now I can work with you. Now I have something to work with, you know? And it's like, wait a minute, but I'm not perfect. I've messed up my life. I've, you know, totally hit bottom. And I feel like that's when I felt spirit the most. And I don't think that you have to be in chaos or hit the bottom to feel spirit. It's not a necessity. But for some reason, that seems to be, I love Marianne Williamson says, people underestimate the power of a breakdown. Many people have little mini breakdowns, you know, and those are fine, but we get going. But those major breakdowns where our life completely falls apart is when God goes, great. Now, I think we're talking about surrender, that's when I can jump in. So.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the breaking, for a long time, I used to think I was breaking apart, and that's how I experienced it. But now I just try to think of it as the fact that I'm breaking open. And I'm breaking open for the possibility that something else can get in, you know, so that it's not just about me. So that could be God, that could be you, that could be a new experience. Like it makes space.
Okay, I want to say this because this is big stuff. So thank you for this so much, Bonnie. Let's go back a little bit. So you just said it's not breaking down, but breaking open. And I have to think about that. I really like that image because I think you're correct that I feel like I break down and there's like a negative feeling even to this day. You know, I'm trying to empower myself, but breaking down versus breaking open.
Or breaking apart. I think a lot of the times we experience ourselves breaking and then we're all these little fragments that we're like trying to put all together. And I don't believe that's actually reality. I mean, that's how we perceive ourselves. But for me, that's what spirituality is all about. Like, spirituality helps me see that those parts were never separate. And like God, energy, higher power, that's what holds that all together. And so for me, having the belief in, and I don't even know what to call it half the time. And sometimes I'm like, girl, really? But, you know, it makes sense that like everything that's in between those cracks, those breaks, the where I perceive separateness is where God lives.
I love that.
In pulling us and bringing us all into oneness.
Thank you for that. What a great gift. Thank you, Bonnie. So talk to me a little bit about, you said, so during our pre-brief, we talked a little bit about, you know, spirituality in connection to coming out as trans. So talk to me a little bit about that, because I think that's breaking open one more part of you and getting to discover that part of you. So tell me about that journey.
Yeah, I mean, my transness is a direct result of my relationship with God and my seeking of spirituality. I believe it is my spirit showing up on the outside. You know, a lot of my life, I had to hide my femininity. I had to hide softness. I had to hide vulnerability. I had to hide my light in order to like survive. Because I thought it made me, it made me vulnerable, and it made me very susceptible to a lot of harm as a child, and then even into adulthood. And then I learned to do that myself. You know, for a long time, I can get over the fact that my mother or my father or people like censor me or don't allow me to be who I am. But, you know, I still can make those choices myself. And the more I seek and reach to God or my understanding of God, the more I just can show up in whatever way, whatever form that I choose to, and want to. And so for me, I feel beautiful. I feel divine. I feel like light, you know, when I'm looking like this, you know, and I'm not always having to look like this, but in order to feel that way. But I definitely, like, this is more of a drag look for me. Mm-hmm. I'm still trying to figure out what I look like as a transgender queer person. But, you know, that's something that I get to continue to explore as long as I continue to seek, I think, God in a relationship with some sort, with my spirit, with the divine within me, the spirit within me. Like, just the better off I'm going to be, and the more like real and authentic I'm going to be, that I'm going to be less tripped up by what the world wants me to be and how the world wants to see me, that I can just be how I want to see me, and how I believe God has and continues to create me to be. And I say God just because it's easier.
It's the word to use. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm always like, well, is that the word I mean? But yeah, I'm with you. Spirit, God. So for people out there listening, talk to me a little bit about maybe how they can, if they've gone away from spirituality, how they can kind of invite that into their life. And specifically, if someone is pondering, you know, or having an inkling of like, I'm not sure if I'm being exactly who I am, not who I'm supposed to be. I want to be really careful about saying that, because I that drives me crazy. I'm supposed to be this or that, but who I am authentically. So what is that journey, or maybe one small step? Because I think that in these shows, sometimes let me rephrase it, I can get overwhelmed listening to people talking and people that have kind of gone through it. So you've kind of been you've been at this I've known you for over 10 years, I think. 11 years, I think.
Pretty close, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this isn't like we just woke up today and went, oh, okay, this is where we are. So talk to us a little bit about those discoveries and how people might take those first steps.
Right. Well, and that really speaks to a lot of what I feel called to be now as a queer chaplain. I feel called to be around people, around death and dying, and that's not to the body, but actually to self. And for me, that has often been in my identities, you know. Eventually, I hold on to an identity, and like it's what I live, and I feel comfortable in it, and I totally become it. And then pretty soon I'm like, this doesn't quite fit. Like, this isn't enough for me. Like, this isn't really full. And I think that's part of even just the idea of maybe that's what you need to do in order to create space for some sort of spiritual experience. You know, you have to be willing to kind of like break through, because a lot of these identities that we sometimes, the ones I had, didn't, like, God or spirituality couldn't exist in those people or in those types of people. And I had to be open to the idea that actually, you know, because I was always a spiritual person, and I always had spirit, and I always had God or whatever in my life. I just was like not in relationship, like in a connected relationship with it. And so that's why it felt so like not right, because it just wasn't true. The truth was I was a spiritual person, and I was, you know, having sex with a lot of people, and I was gay, and I was doing drugs, and I was still spiritual AF, you know, like it never really left me.
Yeah, in my experience too, that spirituality never left me. I just chose to look kind of the other way. I was like, I'm gonna look over here and pretend that it's not there. But even in my darkest days, you know, I would have those moments. But so I want to go back there a little bit. You said the self. So tell us a little bit what your definition of the self is. And I think you did. I think you said it's the identity, but I just want to make sure that I'm not paraphrasing what you're saying.
Yeah, it's just a big idea of like how it is that we see ourselves, who we see ourselves as, what we believe in. You know, as we go through life, in my experience, what I believe actually has to change, because I've come to experience something different. And I can choose to fight that and try to make things be like hold on to a belief that isn't true for me anymore.
Yeah.
And I can be miserable, I can be depressed, I can be unhappy, or I can, just realize that maybe things are different. And in doing that, it's actually a better, more authentic experience.
Well, I do want to challenge you a little bit there, as in, I think when you get to the other side, it's a more authentic feeling. But I think in the middle, like, at least for me, letting go of those preconceived notions about who I am, that though it was chaotic and I was living in pain, that pain was more comfortable than the what if, and that if you can get, I always say, if you can get comfortable with the uncomfortable, you're going to have a life beyond your wildest dreams. And I think, and this conversation is that, I think that's why I would say is that this morning, Bonnie, everything. I love those people that say, I'm an overnight success because of my 10 years of work, and that's kind of what this is. I think. Would you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I do want to say too that it is. I refer to it as being a death and dying. So that is a process, and there is grief and there is loss. So yes, it is it's a painful experience, or we wouldn't go through it. But it's a more true and authentic experience if we can lean into that a little bit more, which again is a lot of what you have to say.
And what I hear is that I think that we talked about trust and faith on another show. Was it faith and can't think of the word, but we're here to say trust us. And I think that in that I don't know who I am authentically because I haven't met that person yet. So I think what I hear from you is to make space for that. And the first step is just to acknowledge that what if who I'm expressing as today is not who I really am? That just opens up the door, because so many times people are like, I can't think about that. Have you ever been in conversation with someone who was just like, their safety was dependent on their ideas? They're just like, nope. So,
yeah, and I feel like that there's been a journey for me to be who I am, or to find who I always was. But a part of that too is it's not about just me being who I am, but it's also becoming what I want to be and what I can be. I think for me, for a while, I just stopped at that idea. Like, okay, I'm like who I am. I am who I always thought I was. I've hit the peak of what I can as, a trailer trash kid, sissy, this is that, I'm so much okay, I made it. But the reality is no, and there is still so much more. And I believe God and spirituality really helps me with that, because I have to break down a lot of those generational ideas and beliefs and understandings of myself and my family and how we fit in the world to actually begin to change the world. And I feel like that's what all of our role is, in our life, is to, all our parents want to do is try to make a better life for us if they can, and they fail. And I think as a queer person who don't have kids, that I don't get to fuck up or mess up. Sorry, I don't get to mess up.
I know. Skip was like,
I said flub up. I don't have my own kids that I can mess up, then, it's the world that I mess up. And so I have to work at being a better person in the world so that I'm not causing harm in the same way that I was before. And I think for a long time, I didn't believe I could be that harmful because of the person that I was. And there was really no one else I was harming, or there was nothing wrong I was doing to harm the world. But in reality, there were things that I could be doing differently that could start to have a better effect, or an effect that I was really aiming for. A little bit better.
A more authentic effect. I think several times during this conversation, we have talked about, I'm kind of putting this on the conversation, sorry, but I do want to talk about this idea of the gray versus black and white. And speaking with you during our pre-brief, we talked about the masculine energy versus the feminine. And I want to say versus, and I think now what I see is it's a yes and. In improv, I love yes and improv, this is the idea that when you're in a scene with a partner, that you never say no to what the partner has given you, the idea the partner has given you. So in life, I think everything is yes and. So, okay, if someone's giving me an idea that even I don't agree with, I go, okay, yes, I can acknowledge and honor that that's how you feel. And let me provide my thoughts compared to yes, but or no, but. So I think that what I see, having known you for so many years, is the yes and. I don't know if I always saw that in you. So tell us a little bit about your ideas, or if this resonates with you, is idea of black and white versus the gray, or maybe you have actually a better way to put it.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that there is so much between, the black and the white. There's gray, there's color, there's just so much, and there's more than we know, there's more than we've experienced. And I think a lot of what I try to do, and a lot of in the way that I exist, is that like people might see me and they might think like, all right,
you have a story.
It also
yeah.
right. And I think sometimes too, people are like, oh, that kind of looks good, I wouldn't expect that, or like those sorts of things. And I think that just kind of sparks the possibility that maybe things could be a little bit different than they are. And I feel like that's the way, like a lot of the work that I do is just to try to give platforms and give space for people to speak their narrative, and for people to be seen as spiritual people, as drag queens and spiritual people, as trans people with spirituality, as drug addicts with spirituality, because we've been told we don't, and those people don't have those things. So that when we become those people, we don't get to invite spirituality into that process. And that's a lot of what I want to do, is to have people invite spirituality into whatever it is that they're going through.
I love it. I was talking with a friend of mine one time who was having obstacles with one of his addictions, and he just wasn't making any headway with it. So instead of trying to run from God, he always would invite God with him. And he said that changed it, because I think in recovery, my idea of a spiritual awakening is a change of thought, a change of looking at the world. And I think that is, and Course in Miracles and all those different things, they talk about the light and the dark, and the kind of the truth versus the fear, and the illusions we make up, or there's so many terms for it. But for me, with spirituality, it's just asking for, it's kind of letting go. I love that you talk about the self. I know in the 12 steps, there's a prayer we use. It says, relieve me of the bondage of self. And that's actually, Skip was talking about his morning routines. That's one of mine, is to relieve me of the bondage of self, so that I can be of service to you and my fellows. And that really, it's not saying, please come join me because I'm lacking you. It's saying, please let me get out of the way so that I can experience all of the universe. So I think that in my moments of ego or myself is when things get dark, or I feel alone, or I feel scared. And when I can let go of that and connect with whatever it is, connect with spirit, connect with community, that's when I think the existence happens that I never even dreamed of.
Right.
So.
Well, and I feel like for me, it's more of, it's less of the knowing and the more of the seeking that is the energy and the animation and the spirit that's needed for me to kind of continue to grow and expand and blossom in life.
So not so much the knowing, but the seeking. I love that.
It's less of the knowing and more of the seeking, because once I start to know stuff, that's it. There's nowhere else to go.
Yeah, there's no more room. Yeah.
Right. And plus, it's not, I mean, I guess it could be your truth and you could live in that, but I just think that there's so much more. I hope that there's more than I know.
And I think we also, I go to like kind of resting areas. We go, this is what I know. Like, it's kind of like, I need to take a breath here. And then I'll jump into the not knowing. And I totally acknowledge that. I'm like, there's sometimes I'm like, you know what? I just need a break right here. So,
right.
Okay, we're coming near the end of our time, but I want to hear so much talking about this gray area. Is your podcast with your aunt? Yeah. How cool is that? So tell me, how did that come to be?
Yeah, it's really great. It's called Splintered Grace, and my aunt was actually the person who took me to church when I was little and created that little Jesus freak in me, right? But then once I became gay and all that sort of stuff, then I started she was my connection to God, which then meant I just couldn't be with her anymore. So we went 20 years. She was my hero. She was everything. She was the one that got out of the small town too. And so we went 20 years with our relationship just changing after me coming out and getting HIV. And it mostly just because it went to the idea of I think we were making assumptions of one another. I think it was true because my aunt shared with me on the podcast, she used to pray that I would not be gay anymore. She used to pray that people would come into my life that would show me how to live a life that wasn't gay. And at one point in time, her faith and her belief in the Bible and Christ and all that convicted her to think, who are you to judge what God creates and has created? Like, who are you to say that what Bonnie Violet is not acceptable? And so that started to change things a little bit. But until I hit 20 years HIV positive, and so I went out to Phoenix to visit to try to meet with the person who infected me because I'd never had a conversation with him. But what happened was I stayed with my aunt, and I wore a dress, and that time I had a beard, and I was a bearded lady, and I showed up, and she took me to church. She took me to the church that I left and that I ended up leaving her at. As a bearded lady, and I had such a magical experience there where they let me in, they didn't kick me out. My aunt sat with me there the whole time, and there was this woman who she was an older Black woman, and I'm like this little queer thing, bearded lady, and she came up behind me and she tapped me on the shoulder and she started singing to me because it was praise and worship time, and she was singing, "You're blessed, I'm blessed, we're all blessed," and she pointed to the sparkles on my face and the sparkles on her dress, and it was just like, and I started singing to her, and it was just this powerful moment. Like, she represented to me that, like, God and church and so many things that had told me that I wasn't worthy, and I think for her, I represented somebody that she wished she could have there with her, that she doesn't, for whatever reason. And so it was a very powerful thing. And from that time on, my aunt and I started to have a relationship. We had such a good experience, and I told her that I thought poorly of her. And anyway, we started a relationship, and so we've been connecting every week for like 2+ years. And so when I decided to do this podcast, we decided to do it together because there are so many families that are choosing to not talk anymore, to not show up for Thanksgiving, with everything even more seems more divisive. We thought, well, we're doing it. Why not share what it's like for other people to do it? And as a transgender queer drag queen and a conservative Christian, those are two people you wouldn't think would mix. And we mix really well.
Love it. So the Black and white coming together. Yeah, I first of all, what a inspiring story. So thank you, Bonnie, for sharing that. And what's your aunt's name?
Tina.
Tina.
She's my aunt.
Hi, Tina. If you're listening, hi, Tina. Or if you listen to this later. And I have an aunt, my favorite aunt, Aunt Bess, who is really into her spirituality and religion at the time, and had kind of similar things. So that's really cool. But talk about the yin and the yang, the black and the white, and then coming together to make these beautiful colors. So thank you.
Right.
For that.
Well, and it's actually been really easy. Like, it hasn't been difficult. When we actually have just made the decision that we're going to be in relationship with one another, that we're going to say stuff that the other one, like, she still calls me she still calls me Dwayne. Like, she's still coming to that space with me, but she usually tries in the beginning of the conversation, and she's putting the effort and she's showing up anyway. I'm also not like holding her to like like I'm allowing her some grace, as well as she's allowing me some grace in my own assumptions and perceptions of her and people like her as well. And so there are still some topics that we don't quite go to, but we do talk about a lot of other things that really is fruitful for our lives.
I love that. I think that that brings to the point of, as you are exploring all of these things, boundaries with people and finding community to support you, and that jumping into, you mentioned about being in Idaho and safe space. So I do say to all the listeners, if you're exploring, or as you're exploring all this, I think we're all exploring our authentic selves, is that usually these break opens need to happen in a safe space so that we can get used to it and we can be with people who are going to affirm that.
Right.
And then we can kind of start spreading out to maybe the more people with different thoughts or different views or judgments. So
yeah, I mean, I think we needed the 20 years to get where we're at. And hopefully other folks don't need that 20 years. And that's kind of what we're hoping to inspire, is that, and not every relationship you need to try this with. There was a fact that we both were on the same page, and we both wanted to understand and be in relationship with each other. And we wanted to actually really show love for one another, no matter what. And you can't do that with everyone,
No,
unfortunately.
I have an aunt who, so it's my favorite aunt's sister who I'm like, you go your way, I'll go my way. And,
Right.
Okay, so I could talk to you for 6 million hours, Bonnie, but Skip's going to say, no, you can't. So with that in mind, I know he's like, oh, okay. We actually are doing a holiday show after this. So
Right.
anyway, so tell us, you are doing so many things. Your schedule is beyond wild, which I
Yeah.
love. The world is getting so much Bonnie. But so you have the podcast. You have Queer Chaplain and Splintered Grace.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you get those. Where can you get those podcasts?
Yeah, so anywhere you listen to a podcast,
That's what
if
I
you
thought.
search for Splintered Grace or A Queer Chaplain, you're going to find my aunt and I and all my other work, interviews with drag queens and trans folks and other faith leaders. Again, just to kind of help people see that these things can exist. These people can exist with spirituality, which is already true.
Yeah.
But part of the process is helping people who maybe haven't laced their narrative with a spiritual thread to do that as well. So that's a big part of what I've been trying, my work tries to do, like my ultimate goal is to help people lace their narrative with a spiritual thread that lasts from birth to now and into the future.
Ooh.
So they can look back and kind of see where spirituality was at place, even if and when they didn't believe, they didn't see, they didn't experience it, and they can actually now see it there, and it actually changes your narrative. And it does cause you to walk about in the world in a little bit different way than prior to not seeing that spirituality in your life.
I can't wait for that book to come out. Hint, hint.
I'm working on it.
So also Chicago, so everything's virtual right now, so everyone can see this, but I love this. You are doing something with the Urban Village Church, and it's going to be streamed, but tell us about what this is. This is so cool. Listen.
Yeah, so I'm collaborating with Urban Village Church out of Chicago, and I'm going to be hosting a series of 6 interviews with 6 Chicago-based drag artists to talk about. It's their 1-hour interviews that'll be done live on Facebook, YouTube, all that fun stuff for an hour, and basically, have them share their drag as well as share their spiritual experience. And so we'll do that for 6 weeks in a row with drag kings, drag queens, and other things, I guess. That feels not quite right, but folks who aren't necessarily kings or queens, but still royalty of some form. As well as then we'll cap that off with like a spiritual drag brunch, in which we'll have a more of, I guess, I don't know, I think all drag is spiritual, and I think all drag is lifting. I identify spirituality as anything that lifts you, lifts your spirit, and animates you in a way that's nice. Then that can come in a lot of forms, and drag has been that for folks without spirituality for a really long time.
Where can they get information about that? Do they to your site, or where should they get the?
Yeah, I mean, I have A Queer Chaplain on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So you can subscribe to me on YouTube, and as everything's created, you can become aware of it there. Again, or follow me on Facebook and or Instagram. Those are probably the best ways to stay in contact.
Or private message me on Facebook, everybody, and I will get you in touch with Bonnie. Bonnie, I'm so grateful. Oh, you had something else to say? Go for it.
No. I mean, I think the biggest thing is like if anyone's interested in wanting to reach out to me just to talk, or you have questions, or you want to collab, you want me to speak somewhere or do something, like I'm totally game. And, I'm devoting my whole life to this right now. I quit my job just so that I can focus on doing queer spiritual stuff. So,
and we thank you for that.
Please reach out. Yeah.
Yes. Please reach out to Bonnie. So, Bonnie, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so grateful that it worked out.
Thank you as well.
And I miss you. I do wish you were back in Chicago, but I'm so grateful you're doing the work you're doing in San Francisco. So,
likewise. Thank you so much for having me today.
Of course.
So great to spend some time with you.
Oh, right. So good to see you. Okay. Actually, and just so everyone knows, I've been talking with her over Zoom also, so we're seeing each other. So, anyway, bye, Bonnie. Best of luck.
Right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And so, okay, that did my heart and my soul good. So, we are going to be back very shortly. So you're getting more of me today. I know. Yay. Skip and I are going to be, doing a show after this. looking at the holidays and just helping us all get in the holiday mood. So we're going to be having some guests and some special guests of ours, friends of mine. I think just people that I adore and love are going to be coming on the show with us. But we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get in the holiday spirit. So you've been listening to Perfect Detours on WGHC 98.3 FM. Change happens here.
This is Bob Kiser. You're listening to WGHC LP 98.3 FM Chicago. Listen to our live stream at WGHCradio.org and click on the Listen Live tab. Happy holidays.
This is Skip Sams, Program Director here at WGHC 98.3 FM. We are your community radio station, and we are here to be your voice for change. Please consider making a donation today on our website at WGHCradio.org. That's WGHCradio.org. Happy holidays.
It's that time of year when the world falls in love. Every song here seems to say, Merry Christmas, may your New Year dreams come true. And this song of mine in 3/4 time wishes you and yours the same thing too.
Welcome back to Perfect Detours on WGHC 98.3 FM, and we just finished speaking with my guest, Bonnie Violet. Skip's like, we need to take a break because we're both like buzzing here because that was just amazing stuff. I'm so grateful for her in my life. I ask each of my guests each week to give me a quote about, I don't know, a quote that they feel they connect to, because if you follow me on Facebook, you'll know that I love quotes. And this is what Bonnie gave to me, and it's from Janet Mock. This quote: I had no villain, no one person to blame for my circumstance, so for years I blamed myself. This lack of a villain initially made it difficult for me to look at my younger self with compassion. And I think the takeaway from that is looking at my younger self with compassion. And I loved how Bonnie said she threads spirituality through someone's entire life. And I think there are moments in our lives, and let me rephrase that, there are moments in my life and the past that I just didn't want to look at anymore. I was like, I did that in the past, but now I'm going to shut the door on it, and I'm just going to continue with my life. And coming to peace with some of that, seeing the perfection in that, seeing spirit in that, I think I found a forgiveness for myself and in the process. So I think that is the takeaway for me for this show with our Perfect Detours, is that even in those detours, those things that we maybe want to forget, that if we can have the courage to go back to those and add some compassion to those moments, remind ourselves that we are doing the best that we can and that we are still perfect spiritual beings having a human experience, that moving on from those, that those can add the color to our life and find forgiveness. So with that, I think that's enough for me regarding Perfect Detours. So I am grateful each week for this opportunity to just explore all of this stuff. Yes, I put together a show I think is going to happen, and then I have guests on that I get to learn and grow from, and I hope that that is the same experience for you. As I keep saying, in weeks to come, I want to hear from you. So if something sparks in you, just a comment or a thought, feel free to call us. We're here. So now we're going to take a break, and in about 10 minutes, Skip and I are back. I'm going to talk about some holiday cheer and all of that kind of good stuff. So if you want to find me, like always, I'm on Facebook, Bob Kiser, Kiser, parentheses Bobby Wentz, my pre-adopted name. On Instagram and Twitter, I'm at Bob Kiser Coach. I love private messages. If you have thoughts about this week's show or topics that we should explore in the weeks to come, bring it on. So anyway, and last thing, just to remind everybody that this is a community radio station, and that we definitely could use the support. That would be great. So if you're looking to find a organization to make a charitable donation to, go to www.wghcradio.org, and on the homepage there is a donate button. We'd be grateful for anything you can donate, and that will keep our lights on and the sound running, and we can have more of these great conversations. So with that, I say goodbye until next week.